Hi, this is Justin Colletti. You may know me from Sonic Scoop, but today I'm on the Plugin Alliance channel, and we have the privilege of having three awesome guests on today. These are the people behind the new Unfiltered Audio plugin called Tails, which is a really unique reverb. It's the first one, at least that I know of, that's focused on keeping transients and kind of non-harmonic content out of your reverb tails to give you a decay that's extremely clean and pure, and there's so many creative things you can do with this. I don't think I can do it justice in words, but I have some guys here who can. They are the designers behind this plugin. Number one, BT, with the giant maze of synthesizers behind him there. He is an electronic musician, composer, and a longtime plugin designer. He's been doing that for a couple decades, and he was one of the driving forces in creating this. BT, how are you doing today?
I'm great, man. It's great to be with you guys. I'm excited to talk all about this. So thanks for having us.
Thanks so much for joining us. Also here are co-founders of Unfiltered Audio. They've made a ton of super successful, super popular plugin releases with Plugin Alliance. We've got Josh Dickinson and Michael Hetrick. Josh, how are you doing?
Thrilled to be here. Thank you.
Good to have you. And Michael?
Doing well. Very excited to be talking to y'all.
All right, once we get through kind of establishing what makes Tails interesting, what makes it unique, I want to talk to Josh and Michael about the development of Unfiltered Audio overall. It's become a fast favorite among fans of Plugin Alliance, and they have new plugins coming out that they'll tell us about. So you get a sneak peek of what's coming next if you stay to the end of this conversation. We'll also get a little bit of a story of the history of the brand and the overall brand philosophy, what ties all of these Unfiltered Audio plugins together. Let's jump in right now and start talking about Tails. And I think, BT, you're the person to talk to about this because I think you kind of have the seed of this idea that you joined forces with Michael and Josh on. Can you tell us what makes Tails unique? Why is it different from other reverb plugins out there?
Yeah, for sure. I would love to. And, you know, just kind of from a macro perspective, the impetus for every plugin that I ever work on is a need in my own workflow. So it always starts from this place of not having either a tool that's commercially available to utilize in my own workflow, and or the process of doing something is so complex and cumbersome that you think, wow, it'd be really terrific to take this and codify the process of automation and a bunch of different things into a singular plugin to do something that you typically are wanting to do in the production process. And that is translated well because, you know, I think that we all face similar problems in the production process. So if you find an elegant solution, insofar as a plugin, it ends up making sense for a lot of people, regardless of idiom and the type of music they're producing. And so that really is the category that Tails falls into. Is it's a plugin that I desperately needed in my own workflow. And, you know, I guess I can just dive right into what is so unique about this as a reverb. The thing I like to lead with is the elephant in the room is it's just an outstanding 4-algorithm reverb. Each one of the algorithms tuned to work across many, many different types of music in many, many contexts. And the controls are all very macroed. So these reverbs are highly tunable, but easy to tune because you're working with parameters that are actually fanned out to a multitude of parameters on a single knob. So it's just a great sounding reverb. I like to start there. But what's so special about Tails?
By itself, without any special features, it's cool sounding.
Yeah, it's just an awesome reverb. And it's funny because, you know, after I show people around it and some of the people that we've had alpha and beta test it, they're like, oh my God, I just thought this was a great reverb. And then you show them some of the things that are specific and unique to it. And they're like, wow, I've needed a reverb like this my whole life. So, so basically.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that. What are the things that make it unique?
Yeah. So there really are three things that make this such a specific and unique reverb. And the first, the foremost and most important, and this is this one that I needed so desperately in my own workflow, is it actually is analyzing the attack transient information, so the plosive information that's coming into the input of the plugin. And when it reaches a certain threshold, it triggers a completely clean reverb buffer. And so you say, what is that? Why would I want to do that? Well, you probably have wanted to do it for a multitude of different reasons and on a plethora of different types of audio material. from a vocal to, orchestral recordings to jazz guitar to synths. It doesn't really matter. One of the things that is so amazing about a reverb is it sets the space for a recording. And full disclaimer here, I'm a kid of the 80s. So I grew up on these big reverb records, like huge Trevor Jones, Trevor Horn, rather. Trevor Jones too, actually. Trevor Horn fan, these big, lush 80s reverb sounds. And so I find myself drawn to that in whatever kind of music I'm making, longer reverbs. And so one of the problems with a long reverb is any kind of harmonic material that passes into the reverb after a couple notes or a couple chords, you're going to get into these really dissonant rubs and blurs that are enharmonic just by virtue of the fact of the physics of having a long reverb. And so what is so special about this multi-buffer capability of tails is that on an attack transient, it triggers a clean reverb. So if you have a vocal that is jumping around and has some interesting chromatic movement, or a big string, sort of orchestral swell that two chords, it's modal interchange, for example, where there's, these chromatic tensions between the chords, it's going to give you a clean reverb, a massive one for every chord or event. And so it makes for this super consonant, but lush, massive reverb. And there's not been a reverb that's done that before. And I know because I needed it really bad. So that's the most special thing about it. And yeah, there's a lot more, but, happy to start there.
Yeah, it's the first that I've ever heard of this kind of functionality inside of reverb. And as soon as I read about it, I said, oh, why hasn't someone done this before? It's one of those things that seems obvious in hindsight, but it's so forward-looking that no one's done it before. What do you think are going to be the kinds of sources that people are going to be most thrilled on if they just go into plugin-alliance.com, download the demo, try it for free for 2 weeks? What are the kinds of things that they should throw it on just to really see where this kind of functionality can shine?
It's great. And just to loop to something you said really quickly, Justin, it's such an astute observation. It seems self-evident doing a plugin where every note has a different reverb. It was so hard to make this plugin, and it's going to be really exciting to hear Josh and Michael speak to that. Just the attack transient detection in this plugin alone, it is such a massive conundrum to solve, to utilize across a bunch of different input sources to make something that feels cohesive and triggers effectively at what our ears or our brains would consider an attack. So that's why I think someone hasn't done it, is because it was really hard just to not the idea necessarily, but the execution of the idea. So to answer your question, I think that the sort of source material that is immediately impressive with Tails is something like a piano or guitars, or synths or a vocal. These kind of things are immediately you get what's happening, especially if you play something interesting that has, interesting harmonic movement or changes. You immediately can say, wow, I can use an 8-second to 10-second reverb, and every chord, I'm going to have this massive lush sound, but it's not going to blur with that last chord and make these enharmonic rubs. Like in the demo that I did for it, there's a radio button in it, and it allows you to switch between, air quotes, normal reverb and this buffer swapping reverb. And I just have a CP70, an electric piano, and I play a phrase and listen to it with a regular reverb, like an 8-second reverb, and it's just a mushy mess. And then you instantiate this thing that is swapping the buffers at the attack transients, and you're like, wow, I have to have a reverb. I don't know what I would do now without this thing, now that I have it. It's just like, it solved a real problem for me personally, so I hope it does for other people as well.
It's interesting too. I always think about it. It's not even just a modern problem. If you think about these medieval composers composing church music, they had to work around the reverb of the space and, devise their compositions to do that. So it's funny with Tails, I always think of this almost supernatural ability to dampen an entire reverb, like a cathedral. You know, you're damping a church if you could do that. It's so strange to think about, but that's sort of how it is.
That's wild. It is true. It's interesting to think that so many of the harmonic rules that came out of those earlier eras that inform us today were informed by the spaces that they were in. But now you can add some of the kind of harmonic complexity that we've become accustomed to with drier music, but then add beautiful, lush reverbs to that. So you don't have to be constrained by those harmonic rules when you're making extremely lush and kind of otherworldly sounding content. One of the other really interesting things that I noticed that you put in here was that it doesn't only swap buffers based on transients. It's by transient and or pitch. So correct me if I'm wrong, but you could have the buffer not reset. If the guitar player is playing the same chord 3 times in a row, it doesn't necessarily have to reset in each of those hits, but as soon as the guitar player changes to a new chord, then it would sense the pitch change and it would only swap the buffer then. So is that correct that you'd have that option as well?
That's right. It takes some tuning, but essentially devising a system that would allow for flexibility like that was a big part of this. So there's different ways to detect a transient. Some are amplitude based, some are spectral based. In practice, neither is perfect. And so we created a system where you could smoothly interpolate between both of those. You could say, let's weigh harmonics more than amplitude, or let's weigh amplitude more than harmonics. And generally you'll find that if you tune it to where you can adjust it until you get something that hits where you want it to, and that will do what you want. So it's sort of it's almost an interactive reverb, or semi-intelligent, but you have to work with it. It's fun in that regard.
Very cool. Now, some of the other things that jumped out at me, and maybe BT or Josh or Michael, maybe you can help flesh out some of these for me. One of the things that jumped out to me when I was reading about this plugin and trying it out, number one, very low on CPU usage. Even though it's doing some amazingly complex stuff, it's not a CPU hog, which is really interesting. Really great kind of MIDI integration, so you can do some really creative things, almost performing this reverb. And then there's those 4 modes you're talking about, and 3 of them I think come from really popular plugins that you guys have already developed, but there's a new mode called this Shimmer Mode that I think BT developed along with you guys. Can you tell us a little bit, BT, about what is that Shimmer Mode? What makes it special? Why did you decide to add that mode to this plugin? And then anything else you think that is a major unique point about Tails?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, one of the things that is difficult about these kind of bucket, brigade, delay, shimmer, diffusion type effects is you're piling harmonic content on harmonic content. It's part of why they're so exciting. They're adding so much information above and beyond what the signal itself is. It also makes them really unmusical when you're passing through any kind of complexity whatsoever harmonically, right? It makes for a huge problem insofar as, again, consonants in a reverb line, which is, I love what Josh is saying. It was such a visceral thing for me when you were saying that, Josh. I was imagining like a chamber ensemble being thrown from one cathedral to the next cathedral on every chord. You know, it's this kind of break. You know what I mean? It's this sort of break of the normal paradigm of physics, this reverb. And it's true, you know, since time immemorial, we were constrained by this sort of thing compositionally. So anyway, in a shimmer reverb, you have all this extra, harmonic complexity that is just inherent in the fact that it's a shimmer reverb / delay, BBD, whatever you want to call it. And so part of what makes it special, is, again, it's just a beautiful algorithm. I had so much fun working with the guys on this algorithm. We did a lot of prototyping for this algorithm. I'm really happy with where we landed with it. And because of this buffer swapping capability, it makes for incredibly rich, harmonically complex shimmer reverb, and it swaps when you get to the next chord. And so you don't have all these painful rubs that make you want to turn your shimmer time down in a normal shimmer algorithm. So I think that that's what's really special about this, the shimmer entails.
Very cool. Now, I really do want to ask you guys as well, since I have you here, 2 co-founders along with BT, I want to ask you more about what's coming next from Unfiltered Audio, and also hear a little bit about your story for people who love the brand but just don't know so much about how you operate and what your philosophy is. Before we get into that, is there any last words that either Josh or Michael that you guys had about Tails from your perspectives, of what makes it unique or interesting or a special project to you?
Yeah, I kind of have two things to bring up. One is the history of this plugin, which is kind of it almost feels like divine intervention in hindsight. Just such a huge coincidence that any of this happened. So this all started back in 2018, which is really fun because I've had two kids since then and got a house, and it's just been like all life changes, and this plugin has still been brewing. But we had a Twitter contest around the time BYOME and Triad came out. And the Twitter contest was won by Eric Johnson, who I believe is actually now editing this video, if I'm not mistaken, or taking care of BT's side
That's
of it.
right. Yeah.
Which is just the craziest thing.
Yeah, strange coincidence.
So he emailed us for his license after he won this Twitter contest that a couple thousand people applied to. And offhand, we just started talking about music, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I'm friends with BT, and he's into your guys' plugins. If you ever want to chat plugin ideas with him, he's a crazy guy. You got to just pick his brain." And so that kind of like started it. And then BT was in town here in Houston performing, and Eric was in town too that same time. And so we scheduled a coffee the next morning. We're just like, all right, let's just talk about plugins. Let's see what happens. And so we get to Cavo Coffee here in Houston, and we are just on the espresso, and we are just bouncing ideas off each other. And I remember thinking like, wait a minute, I thought this guy was a musician. I thought he was a producer. Like, what, how does he know so much about DSP? How does he know so much about theory? Like, it was just like every time I brought up something, he had an answer to it. And so we actually kind of came up with two plugin ideas, or really BT came up with the plugin idea, but we kind of colored in some of the lines during this meeting. And so I called up Josh and was like, all right, here's the weirdest algorithm idea I've ever heard. And he was like, hit me, because Josh loves these projects. Like, the weirder the algorithm, the happier he is. And so I told him, like, okay, how about a poly buffer reverb? And it's been since that moment about 2-3 years of development, just constant back and forth of us sending prototypes to BT, him sending us back recordings, just lots and lots of tuning. But it's been a really cool group effort, watching it come together, and just seeing how this happened, like just the small odds of this ever existing and now having such a wonderful product. It's just really cool.
Sweet.
Yeah, it's been really fun creating something with an artistic hero of ours, because before we even started the company, I was listening to BT's music and never thought we'd get a chance to make a product together. So it's been good.
Oh man, that's so cool. That's so cool to hear from you guys. And we have a really cool through line too, which is this love of Curtis Rhodes' work and Super Collider too, which is kind of, and Michael actually worked with Curtis, so he's an absolute hero of mine. So there's a lot of really cool common intersection amongst us. And speaking of that idea and caffeine poisoning I got at that amazing coffee shop, Michael, I think I'm still recovering from.
We had so much espresso.
Still recovering from. We still have another plugin to make. I'm just realizing, I'm remembering,
yes,
without saying too
panel.
much. So yeah, I think you can expect more from us as a point, but it's been such a thrilling process working with these guys. And I love, it's amazing, because with coding, you can solve the same problem a myriad of different ways. And what these guys do and the amount of thought that they put into what they do is just so elegant and musical. And so I'm thrilled to be collaborating with them. And yes, it's an honor for me too. So yeah.
Beautiful.
It's great. But yeah.
One other counterpoint that I just wanted to bring up, just as a contrast to the run of Tails being like such a tonally focused reverb and being perfect to smooth out the edges. Me as an experimental guy, one quick story I want to tell is that a few years ago, Autechre released this track called Pendulu HV Moda, very catchy title, but it's off their L-Seek album. And ever since I heard that, I was like, this is the most incredible reverb performance I've ever heard in my life. Like, it's just this insane track. It takes like 12 minutes, and the reverb just breathes and morphs and all sorts of strange things happen to it over the course of the track, and it's always been a puzzle to me. And partway through the Tails development, I realized like we've finally come up with a really solid plugin way to pull off a lot of these tricks, and a lot of it is down to having all these performance elements in Tails. Like you can attach the mod wheel of your keyboard to the decay of the reverb. So if you want to like hold a chord and have the room swell around it and then pull it back, you know, you just hold the chord, move the mod wheel and pull it back. And then we also have two MIDI note messages. One is to damp the reverb, like immediately kill the buffer and swap. And then the other is to just mute the reverb, like just kind of a click-free mute switch. So I realized you could pull off like tremoloed reverbs, which is another thing that happens in that track. Or you can just like have a huge swell that just suddenly dies right in the middle of it. No transient needed, nothing, like no cue. Just to have like this incredibly artificial space and make it like very, just like you can mold it in any way is really exciting to me to have in a plugin.
Brilliant.
Yeah, and just overall in terms of kind of what's next or how this fits into our catalog, I think it works really well just in terms of the stuff that we're interested in as creators and artists and stuff. You know, we have this reverb now that's sort of supernatural or hypernormal. It sounds larger than is possible and more harmonic than is possible. It's this thing that's kind of out of this world. And that's what we try to do with a lot of our products. For instance, I won't give away too much, but we're doing that with something about turntables and vinyl, where we're creating this thing that sounds kind of more analog than actual analog turntables, maybe you might say. And we've done that too. Michael did a great job of that on Lo-Fi AF, where it sounds more like lo-fi gear than even real lo-fi gear in a way. I always think of it like that way. So it's, yeah, just going above and beyond what's even possible in analog gear, I think is something that we strive towards and fail interestingly, usually.
Well, can you tease us a little bit more about what some of the next releases are coming from Unfiltered Audio? Anything exciting that you're working on right now that we should keep tuned for?
Absolutely. So speaking of Lo-Fi AF, during the development of that, it was very important to me that we didn't have samples anywhere. A lot of plugins that have sort of noise sources like tape hum and vinyl crackle, a lot of them have loops, like looped samples in them, which I've always found to be kind of a cop-out. And, you know, it's just like part of the fun of noise is it's so organic and unpredictable. It shouldn't be a loop. Even if you can't hear that loop, it just bothers me that that happens. So with lo-fi, I wanted every single noise source to be synthesized on the spot. And so I made a lot of them, but then I got to vinyl and I tried my hand at it and it sounded like garbage. So I messaged Josh and I said, hey, do you want to do this one? And he kind of just disappeared for 2 or 3 weeks. I was just like, hey, okay? And he was like, yeah, I'm working. And so he sent me an entire plugin in response to this prompt. And it's called Needlepoint. And it was his parametric analysis of a turntable. So he was sitting there, he was like, what if we treat dust like grains and have it fall on the turntable in a Gaussian manner, and we actually track the location of each dust? He basically attacked this from a physical modeling perspective, and it sounded unbelievably good. So the vinyl mode that's in lo-fi is this incredible algorithm that he wrote, but literally just a volume knob version of it. And so we held on to that prototype, and we kept coming back to it because I kept loading it up and being like, Josh, this is amazing. I just keep putting this on tracks. Can we turn this into something, something like final, like just release this and make it great? So that's our next plugin now. It's called Needlepoint. And it came out from all of this. And I think it's the best vinyl simulator I've heard, but what makes it so fun is it is hyper real, like Josh was saying, where you can make it sound polite, you can make it sound realistic, but that's not fun. Like you can just really go past the noise levels that would be appropriate, the warp levels that are appropriate. And then the other thing that we've been working on is another one that kind of came out of this lo-fi session, where we've long been joking that we're going to do a one knob plugin, because everyone kind of expects a certain amount of ridiculous complexity from our plugins. And so on lo-fi, Josh wrote the press knob, which is a one knob compressor, or it's really like a maximizer. And it's been kind of a big hit on that plugin, is a lot of people are talking about that press knob. So we then modified it in needlepoint for a little bit more control, a few more modes. But we spun up another plugin that's currently called Brinks, and it's 8 different one knob compressors. We're probably going to extend it a few more, probably I think 16 is our target. It's a completely new world for us, and it's actually very hard to make something with one knob, because it's just constantly finding, how do you tame these sweet spots? How do you make it not feel like a preset machine? How do you make it respond to all these various inputs? And it's been kind of a good research puzzle. But now I'm using needlepoint and Brinks on a lot of tracks. When we designed Lo-Fi, it was kind of designed as a bunch of one knob plugins with different chains. Like we have the analog section, the digital section, the spectral section, but each of those is just kind of like one knob, one purpose. And the complexity comes from simply being able to arrange them. But we always just wanted it to be like, turn one of these and you'll have the sound you want. Turn 2 of them, you'll have something new. And that was the guiding principle there.
It's actually extremely difficult to do that. And like BT was talking about how we macroed out those knobs and made them very dynamic and expressive. That, if anything, that's more difficult than just throwing a bunch of knobs and giving everyone access to it. There's that old phrase I always come back to. I didn't have time to write a shorter letter. So in plugins, making it one knob instead of 10 knobs is like writing a shorter letter. And so really, honestly, working with BT and seeing how he wanted those knobs composed and working with prototypes with us and stuff was pretty informative and made me want to up our game on all of our plugins where possible to try to make fewer knobs, essentially, but no lack of expressivity.
All right, rapid fire round here. If I can get you guys in 1 to 3 sentences to tell me what you think makes unfiltered audio different than other plugin makers. What does it take to be an idea for an unfiltered audio plugin? What ties all of your tools together? I think now you have, I don't know if it's quite a dozen plugins yet, but you've made a bunch since you guys started in 2012. And what's the common thread? Josh, if you don't mind taking a stab first.
I'm not positive how I'd answer that, but honestly, a lot of what we do comes from trying to be normal and failing. We try to make a normal compressor and it comes out the way it comes out. And, maybe that's just our personalities coming out as artists. But I think we always approach it, Mike always says this as well, we approach it like artists. Not that other companies don't, but that's why a prompt like this really made sense. That's how we approach these two. Hey, I've wanted this in compositional form for a long time. How could I create it as a plugin? And that's what inspires an idea.
Yeah, one word that usually hangs in my head while we design something is unopinionated. We try to make gear that doesn't make you sound like the gear, which is sometimes a pet peeve of mine. And I think it's really paid off because we're getting artists from wildly different genres telling us that they use our stuff, and that makes me happier than anything, is to know that our gear isn't just like forcing people to work towards a sound that we wanted.
Yeah. And BT, as an outsider who's now kind of joined the team in a way, making one plugin with these guys and now another one in the works, what were some of the things before you started working with them that attracted you to this brand? What made them special to you? What did you like about their earlier tools?
Well, I think that, first and foremost, we have a shared design paradigm. And Michael just said it really well, which is this idea of inspiring without, imprinting a kind of designer bias or on the end user. So I think that that's a really hard, like razor's edge to walk, is to make something where it's universally inspiring. And I could talk a lot about that, but just the cliff notes is sort of paraphrasing some of what Josh said, about things like macros and band delimiting the choices in a musical way is a very hard thing to do, but successfully leave enough room for many different sorts of people to be inspired by a product. And so, it's something I love about their plugins. It's something I love about designing plugins. So again, it's this sort of shared language that we have that I think made this collaboration pretty effortless. So yeah, that would be my answer to that. And I'm as inspired by their products, even being a collaborator, I think, as other people that aren't. So I love what these guys do. It was thrilling making Tales with them, and I'm excited to support everything they do and excited to do more stuff.
Very cool. Well, I don't think we have enough time today for an entire history of the company, but you guys have made a ton of plugins starting in 2012, joining forces with Plugin Alliance in 2016, having some of your first big hits then, and then a big breakaway hit with, I think, BYOME has been probably one of your most popular plugins, and so many since then. Since you have such a large library of plugins that you've created so quickly, I want to ask each of you for your choice for if you could get someone who's never tried your stuff before to try any 3 of your plugins, which 3 plugins would you get them to try? If there's some overlap in this answer, that's totally fine, but which 3 would you steer people towards and why? Maybe Michael, starting with you this time, because you seem to be the most hesitant to answer this question.
Okay, definitely SpecOps, I think, is...
SpecOps, can you tell us a bit about that? Why that one?
So it's a spectral transformation tool. It came out of my love of Super Collider. So there are a lot of spectral tools on the market, but very few of them allow you to do compound effects. And so this allows you to combine a bunch of different spectral, how do I even want to put it? Spectral mangling, spectral modification. But this is a good example of the unopinionated tools where people can use this for some of the glitchiest, weirdest stuff possible, or they can just use it for traditional pitch shifting. And then some people I've heard from even just use it for EQ work or just like very precise filtering. So it was one of those things where there doesn't really exist anything else like it as far as plugins, but I think a lot of people love it in different ways. I'd probably then say BYOME, which is kind of our sample platter. It's kind of like a little bit of everything that we do in one plugin. And honestly, maybe Sandman Pro. That was our delay that I still just have such a soft spot for. Every time I pop it open, it always makes a track change in a way that I didn't quite expect but love. So I would go with those 3.
Great. And Josh, same question for you. Aside from Tales, which we're talking about today, what are 3 of the other unfiltered audio plugins that you'd be most excited for people to try?
Oh, I was going to say Tales. Because you could do all the reverbs.
Beat you to the punch. Because I just realized as soon as Michael finished that Tales was going to be the obvious answer. But okay, you can say Tales if you really want to.
No, I don't know. I'd say Lo-Fi AF just because that's, first of all, it looks really nice, and I think it kind of incorporates our best visual aesthetic. Shout out to Hans Pasqualini and Paper Noise. And Sandman Pro, I always consider as kind of Mike's magnum opus of delays. So that one's fun. And I think that's where we hit our stride and first started doing the cool visualizers. I liked that. And maybe Dent or Silo. So maybe Silo, I guess, just because we both are huge fans of granular anything. And it's one of our pretty cool ones that has a bunch of the reverbs in it and stuff. Or Dent, since everyone loves that, and it's the weirdest saturator in the world, but I love it too.
How about you, BT, as an active artist yourself? What are the most common unfiltered audio plugins that you're most likely to pull up, or which ones are the most inspiring to you when you do pull them up?
I think the one that really was the kind of inductor that got me into what these guys do is Sandman Pro. And I use it all the time, actually in a very strange way. I like using it on stereo recordings in RX. So, and I'll lasso a spectral area of a finished master and use Sandman Pro. And what I love about it, and this is kind of an artifact that may be unique to RX, is if I change the delay speed, and then, so that's when I open the plugin, it has a set delay time, and I change that, it will actually, the delay will unfold, the spacing will either lengthen or compress, depending on which direction I've done it. And so I'll lasso little spectral areas and use Sandman Pro. And to this day, it's one of the coolest thing on some of the tracks that I've done since I've found it. So Sandman Pro is definitely a repeat go-to for me, as is Triad. I love the ability to, Michael's mentioning the kind of FIR filters in all of their stuff. I can see how people would use these things just for EQing or shelving because they're just clinical. It's insane, the precision of those filters that they've designed universally across all of their products. So, Triad's definitely a go-to for me. And then I guess I'm cheating if I say Tails, but I can't ignore it because it was this massive, issue in my own personal production workflow that is now completely solved. So there's no looking back. So I kind of can't overlook it. But I love universally what these guys do. Lion is something I want to mention too, which is just such a fun, unusual, experimental synth. So there's something to love about all the stuff these guys have done. And clearly, I'm missing a couple plugins too. So I haven't even tried Lo-Fi AF yet. So I can't wait to check that out. But yeah, they're all great. So those are my favorites though.
Awesome. Well, starting with Tails, the best thing for you guys to do is try some of this stuff out for yourself. You can do that totally for free for 2 weeks over at plugin-alliance.com, where you can try out these unfiltered audio plugins or any of the other plugins from the Plugin Alliance family totally for free for 2 weeks. Or if you are a member of the Mega Subscription Bundle, which in my humble opinion is probably the biggest steal in the world of pro audio, Tails is just now a new reverb that's just part of your arsenal. So good on you for being a Mega Subscription Bundle member if you are one. If you're not, go ahead, subscribe. Even if you do it for 1 month, you get to try all of their stuff for 1 month, including Tails. So you got nothing to lose. I'm super excited to dive into this in more depth myself. Like I said, I've never heard of another plugin that does exactly this before, with the buffer swapping, increasing how much consonance you get and how clean your tails can be just by keeping all the unwanted spilkus out of each new reverb tail. So kudos to you guys, BT, Michael, JD. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Thank you guys for hanging out with us. This has been Justin Colletti of Sonic Scoop today on the Plugin Alliance channel with the co-founders of Unfiltered Audio and BT, who designed this Tails plugin together. Thanks again for hanging out with us. See you next time.